The ballroom shimmered like a river of glass. Chandeliers spilled their light over white linen and polished silver, each reflection so sharp it could slice through a person if they stood in the wrong place. I adjusted the fake pearl necklace around my throat and reminded myself to smile at least for the camera. 70 years old and still pretending I belonged. The air smelled of roses, champagne, and money. So much money. The kind of wealth that didn't whisper it, hummed through every crystal and gold-rimmed plate like an electrical current. From my table near the back, I could see my son Marcus standing beside his bride Vanessa Whitmore, glowing under the soft lights. Her dress shimmered like it had been stitched from moonlight and privilege. She was beautiful. I'll never deny that. But even beauty has a shadow, and I could feel hers stretching toward me. My blue markdown dress hung a little loose around my shoulders. I'd bought it 6 months ago after selling my husband's old wristwatch. A small sacrifice, I'd told myself, for Marcus's happiness. The shoes pinched my feet. My knees ached. But none of that hurt as much as realizing that even in this moment, my only son's wedding, I was invisible. Then Vanessa lifted her glass. To new beginnings, she said, her smile wide and sparkling. And to knowing the difference between generosity and investment. The crowd chuckled politely. She paused, scanning the tables until her eyes landed on mine. And to my dear mother-in-law, Mrs. Ruth Carter, whose contributions made this day possible. May she find peace knowing her sacrifice is as priceless as it is irreplaceable. A few confused laughs rippled across the room. I felt every gaze turning toward me, 200 of them like flashlights in a dark forest. Vanessa wasn't finished. And may she also remember that generosity isn't the same as ownership. Some people mistake a wedding for a retirement plan. The room fell silent. My champagne flute trembled in my hand. The bubbles hissed like tiny flames. Marcus's face went pale beside her, but he said nothing. Nothing. I set my glass down carefully, afraid the shaking would spill it. My throat was so dry it burned. Somewhere a photographer clicked his camera. I imagined that moment frozen in time, an old black woman in a cheap blue dress, eyes full of disbelief while the bride glowed like royalty. I rose slowly. My knees protested, but I kept my back straight. If I were going to fall, it would be with dignity. I walked the long stretch of marble toward the exit, every step echoing louder than Vanessa's words. No one stopped me. Outside, the night was heavy and humid, the kind of Georgia heat that clung to your skin. I hailed a taxi. When the driver asked where I was headed, I said softly, home. Only when the city lights blurred behind me did I let a single tear fall. My house on Ashby Street sat quiet and familiar, the paint on the porch peeling like old memories. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I sank into the kitchen chair and looked at the photo of my husband Walter smiling from the frame above the counter. "Did you hear her, Walt?" I whispered. "Did you listen to what she said about me?" 5 years since cancer took him, and I still caught myself talking to him as if he'd gone out to buy groceries and might return any minute. The silence after my words felt like a verdict. I thought of the months leading to that night. The savings withdrawn, the antiques sold, the supplemental insurance canceled, all for a wedding I could barely afford to attend. For Marcus. Always for Marcus. He'd looked so desperate that day he came asking. "Mom, it's just how her family does things," he'd said, voice shaking. "They expect the groom's side to contribute equally 40,000, maybe a little more." I'd laughed back then, not because it was funny, but because the number sounded like another language. 40,000. For flowers, music, champagne, and chandeliers that could blind a person. But when he'd said Vanessa's father already thinks I'm beneath them, something inside me broke. I couldn't let my son stand humiliated in front of that family. I'd already buried one man I loved. I couldn't watch another be torn down. So I did what mothers do. I gave everything. That night, sitting in the quiet kitchen, I reached for my medication, the small orange bottle that rattled like guilt. The pills tasted bitter, but not as bitter as regret. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to the wedding at all. Maybe humiliation is easier when you don't dress up for it. I thought of the crowd's silence, of Vanessa's diamond smile, of Marcus's eyes fixed on the floor. Each memory pulsed in my chest like another heartbeat I didn't want. "They think they know who I am," I murmured to Walter's photo. "But they don't. They only see what I gave away." A gust of wind slipped through the cracked window, rustling the curtains. For a moment it felt like Walter was there, reminding me of what he used to say whenever the world got cruel. "You can't control how they see you, Ruth. You can only control how you stand. I took a long, trembling breath. The clock ticked toward midnight. I traced the edge of Walter's wedding ring still looped through a chain around my neck. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow, I'll start remembering who I was before they made me small. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories arrived like uninvited guests the first time Vanessa came to my home, her perfume too sharp for my old living room. The way she'd looked around, eyes stopping at the faded wallpaper and hand-me-down furniture. Charming, she'd said, the way people say quaint when they mean poor. And Marcus, my sweet, uncertain boy, standing beside her like he was asking permission to exist. I'd served them tea in mismatched cups. Vanessa barely sipped hers. Later that evening, Marcus lingered in the doorway, nervous. They have expectations, he'd said. It's tradition. Tradition. I wanted to laugh then. My mother used to scrub floors for families like the Whitmores. That was tradition. But I didn't laugh because I loved my son more than my pride. Now, in the middle of the night, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. Somewhere down the block, a train rumbled through the darkness, a low, steady sound, like a reminder that the world kept moving even when your life had stopped. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the dull ache where the heart attack had left its mark months before. The doctor had said I was lucky. You need rest, she'd warned. But mothers don't rest. They rebuild quietly in kitchens and hospital rooms when no one is looking. I turned off the light and sat back down at the table. My eyes fell again on Walter's picture. You once said dignity isn't what they give you, I whispered. It's what you refuse to surrender. The words lingered in the air, steady and strong. Maybe this was how healing began, not with forgiveness, but with remembering your own worth. Outside, the street light flickered once, then glowed steady again. The next morning I woke early. The house felt emptier than usual, like it was waiting for me to decide what came next. I made coffee black and strong and sat at the same table as always. But something was different. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt angry, and beneath that anger, a strange flicker of strength. Maybe Vanessa's cruelty had done me a favor. Perhaps that public humiliation was the spark I needed to stop surviving and start reclaiming myself. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The woman who walked out of that ballroom wasn't the same one who had entered. She had nothing left to lose. And sometimes that's where freedom begins. There are mothers like Ruth everywhere, women who give, until there's nothing left, who stay silent, so others can shine. If you've ever been made to feel small for your kindness, remember, this dignity isn't granted, it's reclaimed. Stand tall even when the world turns its back. Because sometimes the moment that breaks you becomes the moment you start rebuilding. 6 months earlier, the world had seemed gentler. The sun slanted through the blinds in golden stripes, and the kettle on my stove let out a soft whistle like it had done every morning for 40 years. I was stirring sugar into my tea when the phone rang. Mom Marcus said, his voice bubbling with excitement. I have news. I smiled instantly. You got promoted better, he said. I'm getting married. The spoon froze mid-air. Married to Vanessa Whitmore, he added quickly. You might have seen her name. Her family owns Whitmore Properties. They're, well, kind of a big deal in Atlanta. He sounded both proud and nervous, as if he was afraid I might not understand what that meant. But I did. I'd lived long enough to know what a big deal meant in this city old money country clubs, the kind of people who smiled at you but never shook your hand too long. I took a slow breath. Well, I said, forcing cheer into my tone. Congratulations, baby. I'm happy for you. When do I get to meet her? Soon, he said, relief flooding his voice. You'll love her. I wasn't so sure. 3 weeks later, Vanessa Whitmore arrived at my door. The first thing I noticed wasn't her beauty, it was her stillness. The kind of calm that came from always being certain of your place in the world. She stepped into my living room wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my car. Her perfume filled the air, soft but commanding, like the smell of power disguised as roses. What a charming tiny home, she said, looking around. I knew that tone. I'd heard it from parents at school board meetings, from women who thought teacher was just another word for poor. Thank you, I said, smiling anyway. It's old, but it's held together like me. She gave a polite laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus tells me you taught literature for 35 years. That's right, mostly at Booker T. Washington High. How fulfilling. she murmured, her gaze already drifting toward the old bookshelf where Walter's photo sat between tattered novels. For a moment, I imagined what she saw: old furniture, faded curtains, a life measured in years instead of wealth. And I hated that I cared. Marcus arrived shortly after with a bouquet of lilies, acting like he could sense the tension from the doorway. Everything okay? Of course, Vanessa said, touching his arm. Your mother was just telling me about her teaching career, so admirable. When they left, I stood at the window watching their car disappear down the street, and for the first time I felt the smallness of my home pressing against me. That night, Marcus returned alone. He didn't sit. He hovered near the counter, fiddling with his coffee mug. Mom, he began, I need to talk to you about something important. I knew that tone, too. It was the one he used as a boy when he broke a neighbor's window. The Whitmores have expectations about the wedding, he said. What kind of expectations? They expect me to contribute half of the costs. It's tradition in their family. I felt my stomach tighten. And how much is that? He hesitated. Around 40 to 45,000. The spoon in my tea clinked against the cup. Marcus, you don't have that kind of money. I know, he said quickly. But Vanessa doesn't know that. If she finds out, her father will think I'm a fraud, like I'm using her. His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment he looked like the boy I used to tuck into bed. Mom, please, he whispered. I can't let her family look down on me, not before we've even started. He didn't ask me directly. He didn't have to. The plea hung in the air, silent but heavy. I looked at him, the son I'd raised alone after Walter died, the boy who'd promised me he'd always be careful with my heart, and I saw the same desperation I'd once seen in Walter's eyes when the mortgage company threatened to take our house. Some burdens repeat themselves across generations. How much do you need? I asked quietly. 45, he said, not meeting my gaze. I nodded slowly. I'll help you. His relief was immediate. He reached across the counter and took my hands. It's just a loan, Mom. I'll pay you back. But we both knew he couldn't. The next morning, I opened my file cabinet, an old metal one Walter had bought at a yard sale, and began sorting through the pieces of my life. Retirement statements, bank balances, insurance forms. My pension gave me $2,800 a month. It was enough to live simply, not to give away half a lifetime's savings. My retirement account had $62,000. My house, though old, still carried a small mortgage. I did the math again and again, as if the numbers might change if I stared long enough. By the third cup of coffee, I realized there was only one way. I'd have to sell the house. When I told Marcus, he protested. No, Mom, absolutely not. It's just a house, I said. I'll rent somewhere smaller. But it's home. Home, I repeated softly. Home is where you stop being ashamed of what you don't have. Right now, I don't even have that. He fell silent. That night, I sat alone with Walter's photograph. The lamplight caught the edges of his smile. What would you do, Walt? I whispered. He'd always been the brave one, investing in things I thought too risky. It'll work out, he used to say. It has to. I touched the frame gently. I hope you're right. The following weeks passed in a blur of goodbyes. I sold Walter's beloved first edition books to an antique dealer who barely looked at them before offering me $6,500. I sold the gold watch he'd worn for 40 years to a collector for $9,000. Each sale felt like a funeral, quiet, necessary, irreversible. The day I handed Marcus the first check for $25,000, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. Thank you, Mom, he said. You're saving me. No, I thought. I'm losing myself. I canceled my supplemental health insurance to make the math work. The knee surgery I'd been putting off, postponed indefinitely. The pain became part of my routine, like the creak of the floorboards or the rattle of the old air conditioner. Every sacrifice was a stitch sewn into the wedding dress of a woman who barely looked at me. When the Whitmores sent out invitations, I wasn't listed as Mrs. Ruth Carter. The envelope read, Marcus Carter's mother. That was all I was now, a title without a name. A month before the wedding, Marcus and Vanessa invited me to tea at the Whitmore estate, a house so large it made my stomach twist. The ceilings seemed to stretch forever, and everything gleamed like it had been polished with pride. Vanessa's mother, a tall woman with silver hair, smiled politely. So friendly of you to come, Mrs. Carter. Thank you, I said, clutching my purse tightly. Vanessa poured tea herself, every movement graceful rehearsed. Public education must have been challenging, she said. I loved my work, I replied. The kids kept me young. I imagine retirement is difficult, she continued, considering the salaries. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but every word landed like a pin in my chest. Marcus cleared his throat. Vanessa. She waved him off with a smile. I'm just curious. It's admirable, honestly, how some people can live on so little and still find joy. I smiled back because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. You'd be surprised how far gratitude can stretch, dear. When I got home that evening, the quiet of my house felt different, heavier, like even the walls pitied me. I sat on the couch and took out Walter's old journal, the one he'd written in during his final months. Between two yellowed pages, I found something I'd never noticed before, an envelope. On it, in his handwriting, "For Ruth when the time is right." I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page typed and signed. My dearest Ruth, if you're reading this, I can no longer help you in person. 15 years ago, I invested $75,000 in a company started by Michael Chen, remember him? The student who came to dinner once, he believed he could change how property management worked. I didn't want to worry you back then, so I kept it quiet. Contact Thomas White at the address below 5 years after my passing. He'll know what to do. Remember, dignity isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to surrender. All my love, Walter. I read it twice, 3 times. My heart pounded, not from illness, but from hope. Had I truly reached the time he meant that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, surrounded by empty teacups and memories. Outside, the crickets sang their endless hymn. Maybe this was what Walter had wanted to remind me, that the life we'd built wasn't measured in money or pity, but in resilience. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop living small. The first warning came as a pressure behind my ribs, sharp, sudden, like my own heart was rejecting the life I'd built around silence. It was 2 weeks before the wedding. The boxes were stacked high in the living room, labeled in black marker books, "Kitchen Memories," my entire existence reduced to cardboard and tape. I was packing the last of Walter's old things when the phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom, the florist wants a deposit today. Can you transfer the remaining 20? I closed my eyes. The sound of his voice, hurried, apologetic, so like his father's, when he didn't want to admit he was in over his head, tightened something in me. "Of course, baby," I said, though my checking account had already been gasping for air. After the call, I looked around the room. There was nothing left to sell except the house itself, and in a few days even that would belong to someone else. I'd signed the papers that morning, hands trembling as I wrote my name. 40 years of life measured in dinners, birthdays, arguments, laughter, all traded for a cashier's check and a hollow quiet. When the realtor slid the keys from my palm, she'd smiled with professional sympathy. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter. It's a seller's market." I'd nodded, pretending I hadn't just sold the only place that still remembered Walter's footsteps. That night, while lifting one of the heavier boxes, I felt it again, that tightness, but stronger this time, spreading like cold fire up my left arm. The box slipped. My knees buckled. The phone was across the room. I tried to reach it, but my breath came short and shallow. By the time I woke again, I was surrounded by white, the sterile kind of white that hums under fluorescent lights. A heart monitor beeped rhythmically beside me. A young woman in a white coat appeared, her face kind but serious. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I'm Dr. Reynolds. You had a mild heart attack. We've inserted a stent to open the blocked artery. You're stable now, but you'll need medication and regular follow-ups." I blinked. "How much will it cost?" She hesitated, glancing at the chart. "Roughly 12,000, not covered by basic Medicare." My chest tightened again this time, not from illness, but from realization. The supplemental insurance I'd canceled to help Marcus, that would have paid for most of it. From the hospital bed, I called my son. He answered immediately. "Mom." "What's wrong? I'm in the hospital," I said. "It's my heart. I'll be fine, but there are bills." How much, I told him. Silence stretched between us like a rope pulled too tight. "I'll talk to Vanessa," he said finally. The next day he came by, his face drawn, his suit rumpled. "Vanessa asked why you canceled your insurance," he said quietly. "I told her you wanted to help with the wedding." His eyes filled with something that looked like disappointment. "She says we'll cover the hospital bill, but she's concerned about your finances. Concerned about my health, you mean?" He looked away. "About the financial impact. She thinks you might expect us to take care of things now." My voice trembled. I asked you for help, Marcus, not her family. He sighed, shoulders slumping. It's complicated. Our accounts will merge after the wedding. Any considerable expense will draw attention. The ache in my chest deepened, but this time it had nothing to do with arteries. The next afternoon, a delivery arrived, roses and lilies in an ornate vase. The card read, "Get well soon, Mrs. Carter. P.S. I've attached the card of an excellent financial planner who works with our family for future considerations. Vanessa." I laughed then, a dry, humorless sound that startled even me. The nurse peeked in. "You okay, ma'am?" "Yes," I lied, just remembering something funny. But there was nothing funny about being pitied by the woman who'd built her happiness on my sacrifice. That night I sat awake long after the nurses dimmed the lights. On the bedside table sat my medication bottles, tiny soldiers in a battle I hadn't agreed to fight. Next to them lay Walter's letter, folded and worn from rereading. "Dignity isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to surrender." I traced the words with my finger. 5 years since his death. Just as the letter had instructed. "Maybe it's time," I whispered. "Perhaps this is what you meant." When I was discharged, I returned to a house that no longer felt like mine. The sold sign in the yard had been replaced with a contractor's banner. They were renovating already. I moved into a small apartment near downtown, a beige building with humming elevators and neighbors who never made eye contact. My chest still ached when I climbed the stairs, but at least I was alive. And being alive meant I could still fight. I took the folded paper from my purse, the name at the bottom, Thomas White, attorney at law. His office sat on the 12th floor of a glass tower overlooking Peachtree Street. He was older, silver-haired, with eyes that had seen too many secrets. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly. "I've been expecting your call." He opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed folder. "Your husband left specific instructions. These documents were to be released 5 years after his passing, or earlier if you faced financial hardship." I unfolded the pages with trembling hands. It detailed Walter's $75,000 investment in a small company called Urban Data Solutions, founded by his former student Michael Chen. What began as a startup was now a major player in real estate technology. "Your husband's 2% stake," Thomas said, "is currently worth approximately $3.5 million. The room tilted. I gripped the chair's armrest. $3.5 million? He nodded. "And growing. The company is developing AI systems that evaluate property values faster and more accurately than traditional firms." I thought of Vanessa's father, the real estate mogul who'd looked at me like I was disposable. The irony hit like lightning. Thomas handed me another envelope. "Your husband also left a personal note." I opened it, and there it was, again, Walter's handwriting. "My dearest Ruth, if you're reading this, it means life has tested you again. This money isn't a reward, it's a reminder. Use it not for comfort, but for dignity. You were always the stronger one." I pressed the letter to my chest. For the first time in years, I cried not from pain, but from release. That night, I sat by the window of my small apartment, city lights glimmering below like scattered diamonds. I arranged my heart medications in a neat row beside me, a silent ritual of survival. In the glass reflection, I saw not a broken older woman, but someone resurfacing slowly, deliberately, from beneath years of self-erasure. Walter had left me more than money. He'd left me a mirror and the courage to look into it again. The day I discovered I was wealthy was the same day I realized how poor my life had become. Money didn't bring comfort, it brought silence. And silence in my house was heavier than grief. After meeting with Mr. Thomas White, I walked out of that glass building with trembling hands and a folder that felt too light for what it carried, proof that I wasn't broken, just forgotten. $3.5 million. Enough to repurchase my house 10 times over, to erase every humiliation, every whispered pity. But I didn't rush to spend a cent. For the first time, I wanted to think before I gave. I spent the next week organizing my life like a battlefield. I opened new accounts quietly, privately, under my maiden name, Ruth Daniels. I paid my medical bills in full. The nurse who handed me the receipt smiled kindly, not knowing I could have bought the whole clinic if I'd wanted to. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No more panic over overdue statements, no more fear of eviction. But peace didn't come easily. It never does for people who've learned to live without it. I kept thinking about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at me in that hospital room, not as his mother, but as a problem to be managed. And yet every time my chest ached, I found myself reaching for the phone to call him. Not to talk about money or pain or betrayal, just to hear his voice. But I didn't. I let the silence grow day after day until it became its own language. A week later, Marcus called first. "Mom," he began cautiously, "I was thinking about coming by this weekend. Vanessa wants to, well, she says it would be good for us to reconnect before the wedding." Reconnecting? The word made me chuckle. I wondered if Vanessa even knew what it meant. "That's fine," I said. "Saturday evening." "Yes. And, Mom, please don't overthink what happened. Vanessa, she didn't mean to hurt you. She's just particular." Particular, I repeated. He hesitated. "She says things differently. She's not from the same background. You know how that can cause misunderstandings." I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. "Yes, Marcus. I know exactly how that can cause misunderstandings. On Saturday, I cooked anyway. Old habits die harder than hope. I made oxtail stew the way Walter used to love it, slow-cooked with thyme and onions, until the whole apartment filled with warmth. I set the table with mismatched plates, one cracked at the edge but polished clean. When Marcus arrived, he looked around and smiled politely. "Smells fantastic, Mom." Vanessa stepped in behind him. She was dressed in white again, always white, like someone who never expected to get dirty. "This is cozy," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "Dinner's ready." She glanced at the stew. "Oh, I didn't realize we were having traditional food." "It's what I know best," I said simply. Marcus quickly added Vanessa's on a special diet for the wedding photos. "Mom, no heavy meats." I nodded. "Then she can eat the rice and vegetables." Vanessa smiled thinly, but I saw her eyes flick toward the wall clock every few minutes, like she was counting the time she had to endure. Halfway through dinner, Marcus tried to bridge the silence. "Mom, I've been meaning to tell you the rehearsal dinner's next week. We'd love for you to say a few words." "A few words?" "Yes. A small toast. Nothing formal. Vanessa thinks it would mean a lot to the family." I studied her face across the table. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around her glass. "Of course," I said, after a pause. "I'll prepare something. Simple." Vanessa smiled again, her teeth too bright. "Wonderful. Just keep it lighthearted. No sentimental stories." "No stories," I asked softly. "But weddings are made of stories." "True," she said. "Just not all of them need to be told." Marcus reached for her hand. "She means she doesn't want to cry in her makeup, Mom." I nodded. "Of course." But something inside me, something small and sharp, began to wake up. After they left, the apartment felt emptier than ever. I washed the dishes slowly, letting the hot water sting my hands. Every bubble that burst in the sink felt like another piece of patience disappearing. That night, I opened Walter's letter again. I didn't cry this time. I just read it like a map. He'd trusted me to decide what dignity meant, and maybe, just maybe, dignity wasn't staying quiet anymore. A few days later, I received a letter from the hospital billing department, one last invoice, a leftover fee of $400. It was small, but it reminded me of how close I'd come to dying for other people's happiness. So I wrote a check, enclosed a note, and signed it with my full name, Mrs. Ruth Daniels Carter, the woman I'd forgotten to be. When the day of the rehearsal dinner arrived, the ballroom was drenched in gold light. I wore a deep green dress this time, not expensive, but elegant, the color of quiet strength. Marcus greeted me at the door. "You look terrific, Mom." "Thank you, baby." Vanessa approached moments later, her smile sharp as glass. "Mrs. Carter, so glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. The dinner was beautiful, perfect in that suffocating way perfection often is. Laughter rose from every table, clinking glasses like wind chimes. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. Marcus looked nervous. Vanessa's smile froze in place. I took the microphone, feeling every eye turned toward me. "I've been asked to keep this brief," I began, my voice steady and lighthearted. A few polite laughs. "I'll try." I looked at Marcus first. My son has always been a dreamer. From the time he was little, he believed that if he worked hard enough, people would see his heart. He got that from his father. Then I turned to Vanessa. And now he's chosen a woman who challenges him in ways even I couldn't. I suppose that's the best a mother can hope for. Her smile flickered just slightly. But I'll say this, life has a way of testing what we call love. It strips away what's borrowed, what's polished, what's performed. And when it's done, what's left, if anything, is truth. I set the microphone down. That's all. The applause was uncertain polite. Vanessa's father nodded stiffly. Marcus stood to hug me, whispering, "That was beautiful." But when I looked into his eyes, I saw confusion, a man torn between two worlds. That night, as I left the ballroom, Vanessa's voice followed me into the corridor. "Marcus, you need to set boundaries. She's trying to make everything about herself." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I'd heard enough. Outside, the air smelled like rain. I tilted my face to the sky and let it fall, cool, clean, washing away everything I'd swallowed for years. The storm had finally broken, and for once I wasn't afraid to get wet. The morning of the wedding came dressed in sunlight and cruelty. Atlanta woke glittering after a night of rain, the kind of bright that made everything look cleaner than it genuinely was. The city shimmered, and so did the lies people told themselves for love. I woke early in my small apartment, steam curling from the coffee cup on the counter. My green dress hung on the door, pressed and ready. I'd chosen it carefully, modest but dignified. The color reminded me of old forests and survival. As I fastened my earrings, I looked into the mirror and said aloud, "You're not going for them. You're going for yourself." The reflection didn't answer, but it didn't flinch either. The Blackwell Hotel, where the Whitmores had rented the entire ballroom, was a cathedral of glass and gold. Chandeliers dangled like constellations. Everything sparkled from the napkin rings to the smiles. I walked through the lobby slowly, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Guests turned as I passed, whispering the way people do when they don't know whether to pity or admire. Marcus met me near the entrance. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but his face didn't. There were shadows under his eyes. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "You made it." "Of course," I said, touching his sleeve gently. "I wouldn't miss your big day." Vanessa appeared moments later, radiant in white silk. The dress cost more than everything I'd ever owned, but it wasn't the fabric that gleamed, it was her certainty, Mrs. Carter, she said sweetly, "Thank you for coming. You look lovely." I smiled back, steady. "So do you." Our eyes met just long enough for her to understand that I wasn't afraid anymore. The ceremony itself was beautiful, flawless, like a performance. Marcus's voice wavered when he said his vows, but Vanessa's was clear, almost rehearsed. Every movement was elegant, every tear carefully timed. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. I clapped too, though my hands felt wooden. For a moment I believed that maybe this was what Walter had wanted to see, his son standing tall, even if the ground beneath him was built on someone else's pride. Then the reception began, and beauty turned sharp. 200 guests filled the ballroom. The champagne flowed, laughter bounced off the crystal walls, and the band played songs I didn't recognize, music for people who'd never had to count their blessings because they'd never run out. I sat at the table farthest from the stage. My name card read, Mrs. Ruth Carter, mother of the groom, in delicate gold ink. It looked elegant, detached like a label on a museum artifact. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted bitter. At the following table, Vanessa's father, Gerald Whitmore, raised his glass, booming about love, unity, and family legacy. His words were smooth, rehearsed, like every other speech he must have given at board meetings. Then came Vanessa's turn. She stood slowly, the diamond earrings catching the light like knives. Her voice carried effortlessly across the room. To new beginnings, she began smiling at Marcus. To family, to faith, and to the people who make this day possible. Polite applause followed. She turned eyes, sweeping the crowd. "And to my dear mother-in-law, Mrs. Ruth Carter." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. "She has been so generous," Vanessa continued, pausing just long enough for the word to sting, and contributing not only her time and love, but also her savings. Truly, what better example of maternal devotion could there be? A few guests chuckled softly, thinking it a joke. Others looked uncertain. Marcus froze beside her. Vanessa raised her glass higher. "And may she never feel the need to turn her generosity into ownership, because weddings, as we know, are about new unions, not investments." The laughter that followed was nervous, scattered, cruel. I felt every eye on me, some sympathetic, others entertained. My champagne glass trembled in my hand. Marcus didn't say a word. The ballroom spun, not from alcohol, but from disbelief. I set my glass down carefully, afraid it might shatter. My heart pounded so loud it drowned the music. I stood slowly. The scraping of my chair echoed through the silence. Without a word, I walked across the polished marble, each step louder than her voice. The doors to the ballroom were heavy, but when I pushed them open, they gave way easily, like the final pages of a book closing. Outside, the city air hit me like a slap, warm, heavy, and alive. I walked until the music faded behind me, until the hotel became just another gleaming tower in the skyline. When the taxi pulled up, the driver asked, "Rough night?" I almost laughed. "You could say that." "Where to home?" I said. And then, after a pause, "No, not that home. Take me downtown." I found myself back at my apartment, the walls still smelling faintly of time and old paint. I kicked off my shoes and sank into the chair by the window. It was quiet except for the hum of traffic below. I reached for the framed photo of Walter. His eyes were the same steady, forgiving, alive in ways that made me ache. "They humiliated me, Walt," I whispered in front of everyone. The room didn't answer. But I heard my own voice echoing back stronger than before. "They think they won tonight, but this isn't over." I set the photo down beside my medication, the bottles lined like soldiers awaiting command. Sleep never came. Instead, I sat in the dark, replaying every word of Vanessa's toast. The laughter, the silence, Marcus's stillness. Each one carved a mark more profound than the last. But somewhere inside the pain, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. Walter's words returned to me like a heartbeat. Use it not for comfort, but for dignity. Maybe this was the test he had foreseen, the moment when pain became purpose. I rose from my chair, opened my laptop, and searched for urban data solutions. If Vanessa's family lived by wealth and image, then I would live by truth and quiet power. The company website glowed blue in the darkness. A message from the CEO read, "Building the future of real estate through technology and integrity." I smiled. Integrity, the one currency the Whitmores could never counterfeit. As dawn crept through the blinds, the city outside began to stir. Somewhere across town, my son was probably waking beside his new wife, believing the world had been made clean by love and ceremony. But I knew better. Love without respect was just another form of debt. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, my hands steady now. The green dress still hung over the chair, wrinkled and stained by champagne. I folded it carefully, placing it in the closet next to Walter's old jacket. Then I whispered to the empty room, "Let them have their fortune. I have mine." And in the quiet that followed, my heart, scarred, mended, stronger beat with something that almost sounded like victory. For 3 nights after the wedding, I barely slept. The sound of champagne glasses and laughter still haunted the corners of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, Vanessa smiling as she humiliated me beneath a chandelier. But shame, when left long enough, ferments into something else. It becomes resolve. On the 4th night, unable to bear the silence, I opened the box that held Walter's letters again. They smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. Most were yellowed with time, written during our early years together when he still believed life could be tamed with kindness and good grammar. But that night, a new envelope caught my eye, one I'd never noticed before. It was tucked behind a stack of insurance forms, brittle and sealed with wax. On the front, in his neat handwriting, my hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a short note written in his steady, measured way. "My love. If this finds you in pain, remember that our worth was never measured by what we could give, but by what we could endure with grace. You've spent your life teaching others to find truth in words. Now find truth in yourself. The world may underestimate you, but that's your advantage. Use it when the time comes, and it will come. W." I read it again and again until the ink blurred. Walter had always known me better than I knew myself. I set the letter beside my tea and stared at the night through the window. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of downtown Atlanta flickered like restless eyes. He was right, the time had come. The next morning, I called Thomas White, the attorney who'd handled Walter's investment papers. He sounded surprised but pleased. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I was hoping to hear from you again. There are some updates you might want to see regarding your shares in Urban Data Solutions. We scheduled a meeting for Friday." For the next few days, I prepared not with anger but with precision. I wanted to understand exactly what I owned and what power it gave me. I researched the company, reading articles late into the night. Urban Data had grown faster than even Thomas had predicted. Their AI platform was transforming how real estate was evaluated, making human brokers nearly obsolete. And one of the companies most threatened by their rise was, of course, Whitmore Holdings, Vanessa's family business. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt divine. Friday came gray and humid. Thomas's office was calm and quiet, filled with the faint hum of computers and the smell of polished wood. He welcomed me with his usual gentleness. "How are you holding up? I'm still standing," I said. He smiled. "Then you're already ahead of most." He handed me a folder. "Your husband's investment has matured significantly. The latest valuation puts your holdings at approximately $4.1 million. You're officially one of Urban Data's top private shareholders." The number didn't excite me. It humbled me because I knew what I had to do with it. Thomas continued. "There's something else." The CEO, Michael Chen, asked if you'd be willing to meet. He remembers Walter fondly, said your husband's belief in him kept the company alive during its leanest years. I nodded slowly. "Tell him I'll meet him." That afternoon, I walked to the cafe near Peachtree where Walter and I used to have breakfast every Sunday. It was small, noisy, filled with the scent of butter and roasted coffee. When I arrived, a man stood to greet me, a bit older than I remembered from the news articles, his hair silvered at the edges, but his eyes bright with that same hunger for progress Walter had once admired. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Or should I say Mrs. Daniels? Walter used to talk about you endlessly." "Ruth is fine," I replied. We talked for an hour about Walter, about the company, about how far it had come. Then Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You probably don't know this, but your late husband's advice changed everything for me. He told me once that true innovation isn't about replacing people, it's about restoring fairness. I never forgot that." My throat tightened. He believed in that until the day he died. Michael smiled. "Then I think he'd be proud to know we're launching a new initiative, one focused on community housing, using our technology to make affordable developments more transparent. If you'd be open to it, I'd like you to be part of the advisory board." "Me?" I asked. He nodded. "You own part of the vision. It's only right you help guide it." When I left the cafe, rain was beginning to fall, a soft drizzle that blurred the streetlights. I didn't run. I let it soak through my hair and dress, cold and grounding. I thought of Vanessa's toast, her cruel laughter echoing beneath the chandeliers. And I realized something: she had given me exactly what I needed. Humiliation had burned away the last of my fear. Now there was only clarity. That evening I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a letter to Marcus, not yet, but to myself. You have survived everything meant to break you. You gave, you were betrayed, and yet you are still here. Let this be the beginning of something not for them, but for you. The pen scratched quietly across the page, steady and deliberate. By the time I finished, the sky outside had turned violet. 2 days later, Marcus called. His voice was subdued. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course." He arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his tie crooked. When he sat down, I poured him tea. "Vanessa's been upset," he began. "She feels like you left the wedding too suddenly." I looked at him calmly. "Did she tell you why?" He hesitated. "She said it was a misunderstanding, that she was trying to make a light-hearted joke." I almost smiled. "Marcus, do you know what's worse than cruelty? Cruelty disguised as humor." He didn't answer. "I'm not angry at you," I said softly, "but I'm disappointed that you didn't stop her." He looked down at his hands. I didn't know what to do. It all happened so fast. "It always does," I replied. He sighed. "Vanessa wants to have dinner soon to make things right." "Good," I said. "Tell her I'd be delighted." He blinked, surprised by my tone. "You would?" "Yes. It's time we cleared the air." But what I didn't tell him was that I already knew how that dinner would end. Because I'd learned one thing from Walter's final letter: power doesn't announce itself. It waits quietly until the world forgets you, then it rises. And this time, I was ready. The night of the dinner arrived, cloaked in summer heat, thick, heavy, almost theatrical. Atlanta glowed with a kind of restless energy that made everything feel like it was waiting to happen. I dressed slowly, choosing a deep burgundy dress that Walter had once loved. The color made me look stronger than I felt, and that was enough. My pearl earrings gleamed faintly in the light, real ones this time, not the imitation pair I'd worn to the wedding. The restaurant Vanessa had chosen was a rooftop venue overlooking the skyline. Expensive, pretentious, the kind of place that measured worth by the number of zeros on a receipt. When I arrived, Marcus and Vanessa were already seated. He stood when he saw me, nervous smile flickering across his face. "Mom," he said softly, "you look incredible." "Thank you, baby," I replied. Vanessa smiled, a picture of calm civility. "Mrs. Carter, it's terrific to see you again. I hope we can clear the air tonight." "I hope so too," I said, taking my seat. The waiter poured champagne. The bubbles rose and burst between us like small, silent arguments. Vanessa began. "First, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding at the wedding. I realize now that my words might have sounded inappropriate." "Might have?" I asked gently. Her lips curved just barely. "Yes. I spoke in jest, but I can see how they may have been misinterpreted." Marcus reached for her hand under the table. "Vanessa means she's sorry, Mom." "Truly." I studied her face. Not a flicker of remorse, only performance. The same kind she'd given during the vows. "Apology accepted," I said finally. "But forgiveness doesn't erase memory." Vanessa tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Of course. Still, I hope we can move forward as a family, especially now that Marcus and I are planning bigger things." I raised an eyebrow. "Bigger things?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Vanessa's father is expanding the company. There's an opportunity to join in consulting investments partnerships. We thought maybe, well, perhaps you'd like to be involved somehow." "Involved how?" Well, Vanessa said smoothly. "We've heard Urban Data is making some bold moves in the market. Your husband's small investment turned into quite a success, didn't it? The Whitmores are looking to adapt, and it would be mutually beneficial if we worked together." I smiled. Mutually beneficial, such an elegant phrase. They didn't know I'd already met with Urban Data's CEO. They didn't know that Walter's name still opened doors in rooms they'd never imagined. "Tell me," I said, keeping my tone light, "how do you see this partnership working?" Vanessa's eyes glimmered with calculation. "You'd provide insight access, perhaps, to contacts within the company. In return, we could offer substantial dividends or even buyout options. Everyone gains. Everyone." She hesitated. "Well, of course we'd ensure you're well compensated." I took a slow sip of water. "How generous." Marcus leaned forward. "Mom, this could really bridge the gap between our families. Imagine your experience, their resources. It's what Dad would have wanted." The mention of Walter's name lit a spark behind my ribs, half ache, half fury. "You're probably right," I said softly. "But tell me, Marcus, when she humiliated me in front of 200 people, do you think that's what your father would have wanted too?" Silence fell. Even the waiter paused nearby, sensing the sudden change in air. "Mom," he said, voice low. "Please no," I interrupted gently. "You asked me to dinner. Let's have an honest conversation for once." Vanessa set down her glass, her voice calm but tight. "Mrs. Carter, I didn't mean to offend you, but surely you understand how public perception matters in our circles. The way people view wealth, reputation, it affects business. And human decency," I asked. She blinked. "Excuse me. You talk about reputation as if it's the same thing as worth. But those two aren't synonyms, dear. I taught English for 35 years. Words matter." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, don't, Marcus. You wanted peace." "This is peace. It just has truth in it." Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time. "I was trying to protect our image by destroying mine." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I leaned back, folding my hands. "You know, Vanessa, the thing about money is that it always tells on you. It reveals what kind of person you truly are. Some use it to build, others to bully." Marcus exhaled shakily. "Mom, please. That's enough, no baby," I said quietly. "It's finally just enough." The waiter arrived with our entrees, salmon, for them roasted chicken for me. None of us touched the food. The city lights glittered around us, cold and sharp as the truth between us. Vanessa spoke first. "I see you've done your research. You're aware of Urban Data's market position. So you must understand that collaboration would benefit everyone involved." "I understand perfectly," I said. "In fact, I had a lovely meeting with Michael Chen just a few days ago." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Oh, yes. He spoke fondly of Walter. Invited me to join the advisory board." Marcus blinked. "Wait, you did what?" I smiled faintly. "Apparently your father's investment wasn't so small after all. I own a significant portion of the company, now enough to have a voice." Vanessa's expression hardened. "That's surprising." "It shouldn't be," I said evenly. "Walter always believed in long-term vision, something the Whitmores might want to learn." Her cheeks flushed. Are you implying I'm not implying anything? I'm simply saying I don't sell what I didn't buy. For a moment, none of us spoke. Only the hum of the city filled the silence. Then Marcus whispered, Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because, sweetheart, I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. He flinched as if struck. I didn't mean I know, but you did it anyway. His eyes shimmered with regret. I was scared. I didn't want to lose her. And in the process, I said you almost lost yourself. Vanessa suddenly stood. This is pointless. We came here to make peace, not rehash the past. I looked up at her. Then perhaps peace requires honesty. You can't build anything solid on deceit. She hesitated, her mask cracking again, but she said nothing. Marcus stood too uncertain between us, his loyalty pulling him in opposite directions. I rose slowly, placing my napkin on the table. Vanessa, I said you and your family built your empire on appearances. But one day, appearances fade. When that happens, remember, dignity doesn't. Her jaw tightened. Are you threatening me? I smiled serene. No, dear. I'm teaching you. Then I turned to Marcus. I'm leaving now. You can decide for yourself which version of family you believe in. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint buzz of city air leaking through the glass walls. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the night and took a deep breath. The air was thick with jasmine and rain. I walked to the edge of the parking lot and looked at the skyline, bright, sprawling, merciless. Walter would have laughed at the irony of it all, that his quiet investment, the one he'd hidden away for fear of risk, had become the very thing that restored me. I whispered, You were right again, my love. Somewhere far above, thunder rumbled softly. I didn't see it as a warning. It sounded like applause. A year passed, not in a rush, but in quiet ripples, like the way the tide pulls back before returning stronger. Atlanta changed with the seasons, and so did I. When I looked back, it was hard to believe that the woman who once stood humiliated beneath the chandeliers of the Whitmore's ballroom was the same woman signing documents in her new Midtown office overlooking Peachtree Street. The room smelled faintly of lilies and cedar polish. On my desk sat a small bronze nameplate that read, Urban Data's new initiative. The Carter Project had begun 6 months earlier. It focused on revitalizing low-income neighborhoods with transparent technology, creating affordable homes, but more importantly, restoring dignity to the people who lived in them. Every day I met teachers, single mothers, retired nurses, people who reminded me of who I had once been. People who had given too much and received too little. When they thanked me, I told them, Don't. You're the reason I'm here. And it was true. Marcus visited often now. He had left the Whitmore's company 2 months after that dinner. I hadn't told him to, I hadn't needed to. He came to the decision quietly, like someone finally realizing which house was burning. He started his own consulting firm, small, humble, but honest. Sometimes he'd bring me coffee in the mornings, the same brand Walter used to love. Urban Data really listens to you, he said one day, looking around my office. I smiled because I listened first. He chuckled. Vanessa still doesn't understand that. I didn't ask about her, I didn't need to. But one morning when he came by with his usual coffee and hesitant expression, I knew. She left, he said softly. Moved back to her parents' house. Said she needed space. I looked out the window. Sometimes space is the only thing that lets truth breathe. He nodded. I think she thought I'd follow her. But I'm tired of being someone else's shadow. I reached across the desk and took his hand. I'm proud of you, Marcus. He squeezed back, eyes glistening. You were right, Mom. Dignity doesn't fade. That night I went home to my apartment. The air was cool, humming faintly with the sound of summer rain. I poured myself tea and lit a candle near the photograph of Walter. For the first time in years, I didn't speak to him in grief. I spoke to him as if he were sitting across from me again, calm and amused. You'd laugh if you saw me now, I said quietly, a 70-year-old woman with a title and a team. The candlelight flickered as if in agreement. I thought about the girl I used to be, the teacher who corrected essays late into the night, who believed kindness was its own reward. And about the woman I became, the one who learned that kindness without boundaries was an invitation to be erased. Both of them lived in me. Both of them were necessary. A few weeks later, the first housing development under the Carter Project opened in a quiet part of Decatur. It was small, just 12 homes, but each one was filled with light built with care and designed to be genuinely affordable. There was a ribbon-cutting ceremony, cameras, reporters, city officials. But when the mayor tried to hand me the scissors, I shook my head. "This isn't about me," I said. "Let the first family do it." A young couple stepped forward, a nurse and a mechanic with their two small children. The little girl's hands trembled as she cut the ribbon, laughter bursting from her like bells. In that sound, something healed in me. For so long, my story had been about loss of pride, of trust, of belonging. Now it was about building again. Not revenge, not even redemption, just continuation. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, a woman approached me. She was around Vanessa's age, dressed plainly, carrying a baby on her hip. "Mrs. Carter," she asked, "I just wanted to say thank you. My mother was one of your students years ago. She said you taught her to stand up straight even when the world bends. She told me to tell you that she never forgot that." Tears pricked my eyes. "Your mother sounds like she remembered more than grammar." The woman smiled. "She did. And now I will too." As she walked away, I realized how full circle life could be, how the lessons we give away sometimes find their way back wearing new faces. A month later, I received an invitation in the mail. Cream-colored gold embossed familiar. It was from Vanessa. The card read, "Dear Mrs. Carter, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to ask if you'd be willing to meet. I owe you an apology, one I should have given a long time ago. Vanessa." I folded the card and set it aside. For 2 days, I didn't answer. Then one morning, while brewing tea, I realized that silence was no longer strength. So I wrote back, "Vanessa, I'll meet you. Same cafe where we first spoke about the wedding. Friday at noon. Ruth." Friday came with gentle sunlight. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. Vanessa arrived right on time. She looked thinner, softer somehow, like someone who had finally stopped performing. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, voice subdued. I nodded. "Sit down." She did, folding her hands like a schoolgirl about to confess. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I said things I can't take back. I hurt you because I was ashamed that your son loved you more than he respected me. I tried to humiliate you to prove that I had control, but all I did was lose myself." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, "It takes courage to say that." She looked up, tears brightening her eyes. "Marcus told me what you've done. About the project. About everything. You didn't just survive, you built something. I envy that." "Don't envy it," I said gently. "Just build your own." She nodded, exhaling. "I'd like to volunteer if you'll let me for the housing project. I think I could help." I studied her face. There was no arrogance left, only exhaustion and sincerity. "All right," I said finally. "But you start from the ground. No titles, no spotlight." A faint smile crossed her lips. "That's fair." When I walked home that evening, the air smelled of magnolia and wet pavement. The city lights shimmered like stars spilled across the asphalt. I thought of Walter again, of how love changes form but never truly leaves, and of Marcus and Vanessa, still flawed, still learning, but perhaps finally growing into something tangible. I had spent decades giving, then years rebuilding. Now for the first time I felt whole, not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped needing to. Life wasn't a war to be fought, it was a garden to be tended, and somewhere between loss and renewal, I had found my peace. Autumn came quietly like forgiveness. The trees along Peachtree turned copper and gold, and the air grew crisp enough to make each breath feel earned. For the first time in years, I could walk through the city without feeling small. The world hadn't changed, but my posture had. It had been 3 months since Vanessa joined the Carter Project as a volunteer. At first, I kept my distance. She arrived early, left late, spoke little. She handled paperwork deliveries and community meetings without complaint. The other volunteers liked her, though they didn't know who she truly was. I never introduced her as my daughter-in-law. I let her earn her own name. One afternoon, while reviewing housing applications, I noticed her at the end of the hall, kneeling beside an older woman who couldn't read the forms. Vanessa guided her hand patiently, syllable by syllable. The scene struck me, its quietness, its sincerity. There was no audience, no performance, just a young woman trying at last to be human. That night I stayed late at the office. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows. I opened Walter's old notebook, the one he used for budgeting and stray thoughts. Inside I found a quote he'd scribbled from Maya Angelou: "I can be changed by what happens to me." but I refused to be reduced by it. I smiled. He would have liked this new chapter of my life, the one where pain didn't vanish, it simply transformed. The next morning, Marcus called. Mom, he said, his voice bright for the first time in a long while. We've been talking again. I said nothing for a moment, waiting for the familiar ache that used to follow her name. It didn't come. She's been helping out a lot at the project, he continued. She told me you've been patient with her. Thank you. I wasn't patient, I replied. I was observant. There's a difference. He chuckled softly. She's different now. Softer. I don't know what changed her. Life did, I said. It always does, eventually. He was silent, then asked, Would you come to dinner with us next week, just the three of us? No business talk, no apologies. I hesitated. I'll think about it. That evening, as I walked home, I passed by the community garden we'd built behind the new housing block. The air smelled of wet soil and tomato leaves. A small boy waved at me from behind the fence holding a sunflower almost taller than he was. Mrs. Carter, look, it grew. I smiled. It did. You took care of it, he grinned proudly. My mom says plants grow better when you talk nice to them. She's right, I said. Everything does. As I walked away, I thought about growth, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the type that happens quietly when no one is watching. Maybe people were no different from plants. Perhaps even love wasn't. Dinner came the following Thursday. I wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry. Not armor, not disguise, just me. Marcus had chosen a small restaurant in Inman Park, one without chandeliers or spotlights. When I arrived, they were already there. Vanessa stood as I approached, her expression uncertain but warm. Mrs. Carter, she greeted. Ruth? I corrected gently. If we're to start over, let's at least be honest. She nodded. Ruth, then. We ordered food, made small talk. It was awkward at first, like walking on newly repaired bridges, testing each step before trusting it. But soon something shifted. Marcus made us laugh, telling a story about his disastrous attempt at cooking gumbo. Vanessa teased him, and I found myself smiling without effort. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa said quietly, Marcus told me you kept Walter's investment all these years, that you protected it even when things got hard. Yes, I said. He left it for a purpose. I just had to grow into it. She looked down. I think I used to resent that kind of strength. I thought it made me smaller. But now I see it's what I was missing. Strength isn't loud, I said. It's endurance. You learn that the hard way. Her eyes glistened. Thank you for giving me another chance. I studied her for a long moment. You didn't need my permission to change, just your own. Later that night, as we stepped out of the restaurant, the city was glowing in soft amber light. The streets shimmered from a drizzle. Marcus offered to drive me home, but I declined. I'll walk, I said. It's a good night for it. He hugged me tightly before letting go. I love you, Mom. I smiled. I know. Take care of her. As they drove away, I stood under the street lamp for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the city. Somewhere deep inside, a weight I'd carried for years finally began to lift. The following week, Urban Data hosted a gala to celebrate the success of the Carter Project. It wasn't my idea, Michael insisted. People need stories of hope, he said. Yours matters. I almost refused until I realized it wasn't about me. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced and then decided to speak again. The event was held in the very same ballroom where I'd once been humiliated. When I entered, the sight nearly stole my breath. The chandeliers still sparkled like constellations, but this time they didn't feel like judgment. They felt like light. Reporters crowded near the stage. Cameras flashed. Michael Chen introduced me as a woman who taught us that dignity can rebuild cities. When he handed me the microphone, I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, young, old, rich, poor. And among them, I saw Marcus and Vanessa standing side by side. She was holding his hand. I spoke simply. We build homes, yes. But what we're really rebuilding is faith in ourselves and one another. Sometimes life tears everything down so we can see what's truly strong enough to last. The room was quiet when I finished. Then applause broke out, not thunderous, but warm, sustained. It sounded like forgiveness. After the event, Vanessa approached me backstage. She held out a small box. I wanted to give you this, she said. Inside was a silver watch, restored, polished, gleaming like new. I repurchased it, she said softly, from the auction house. Walter's watch. It belongs with you. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The second hand ticked steadily, a live patient. Thank you, I whispered. It's time, she said, for all of us. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the girl who once sneered beneath the chandeliers, but a woman who had finally learned what grace costs. That night I returned home and placed the watch beside Walter's photo. The room was quiet, bathed in moonlight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was living. And as the clock ticked softly beside me, I realized that maybe the sound I'd been chasing all along wasn't victory, it was peace. Winter came softly that year. No snow, just thin frost on the windows and the low hum of radiators. Atlanta glittered faintly at night, as if the city itself had learned to glow from within. It had been exactly 1 year since the night of the gala, 1 year since the ballroom lights turned from humiliation to triumph. And yet what I remembered most wasn't the applause or the success, it was the quiet afterward, the sound of stillness when a storm finally ends. My life had settled into a rhythm again, gentle but full. Mornings began with coffee and a walk through the community garden. Afternoons belonged to meetings at the Carter Project. Evenings were for reading reflection and phone calls from Marcus, who had turned his consulting firm into a thriving partnership with local schools. Sometimes Vanessa joined those calls, laughing in the background. They were rebuilding slowly, respectfully. And though I kept my distance, I found comfort in knowing that the bridge between us hadn't burned completely. It had simply been rebuilt brick by brick, truth by truth. That February, the city invited me to speak at a regional education conference. The topic, Legacy Leadership and the Hidden Power of Ordinary Women. When I stood on that stage, I saw not an audience of strangers, but faces that could have been mine at different ages. Young teachers, single mothers, quiet dreamers, still unsure of their worth. I told them leadership doesn't always look like command. Sometimes it's just staying kind in a world that rewards cruelty. Sometimes it's surviving what was meant to break you and deciding to grow anyway. They clapped, but what I saw in their eyes was what mattered most: recognition. The kind that passes silently between women who have all had to start over. Afterward, one of the attendees approached me, a young black teacher from Alabama. She said softly, "Hearing you speak, it makes me think maybe I can keep going even when nobody sees what I'm trying to do." I smiled. Someone always sees, even if it's just you. That spring, Marcus called with unexpected news. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling with the kind of joy that carried old pain, "Vanessa and I, we're expecting." For a long time I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, but not from fear or resentment. This was something new, something like hope. When I finally managed. "October," he said. "We haven't told anyone else yet. But we wanted you to know first." I laughed, soft and disbelieving. "Your father would have spoiled that baby rotten." Marcus chuckled. "I plan to continue the tradition." That night, when I lit the candle beside Walter's photograph, I said quietly, "You hear that, love? We're going to be grandparents." The flame wavered once, then steadied as if in agreement. Vanessa continued volunteering through her pregnancy. She moved slower, rested often, but refused to step back entirely. One afternoon, I found her sitting by the garden, her hand resting gently on her belly. "The baby kicks every time I walk past the tomatoes," she said with a small laugh. "Maybe it'll be a gardener," I replied. "Or stubborn," she smiled, like both of us. I sat beside her, the silence between us no longer heavy, but peaceful. "You've changed a lot, Vanessa," I said. She looked down. "I had to. I didn't like the person I used to be." "That version of you taught you something, though," I said. "Without her, you wouldn't be this one." Her eyes welled up. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I did give up," I said honestly. "But you didn't let that be the end. That's what matters." She laughed through her tears. "Maybe that's our family's gift. We fall apart dramatically, but we rebuild beautifully." The baby was born on an October morning, foggy, tender, and cool. Marcus called from the hospital at dawn, his voice shaking with wonder. "Mom, she's perfect. Her name's Grace Walter Carter." The name caught in my throat. "Grace," I whispered. "That's what saved us, isn't it?" He laughed, his voice breaking. "Yeah, Grace." When I arrived, Vanessa was asleep, pale but peaceful. Marcus handed me the baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. I held her carefully, feeling her heartbeat against mine, tiny, sure, unafraid. Her skin was warm, and her eyes, when they blinked open, were deep brown like Marcus's, like Walter's. "Welcome home, little one," I whispered. "You don't know it yet, but you've already healed generations." Over the next few months, I watched as our family found its rhythm again. Marcus was gentler, slower to anger. Vanessa was softer but stronger. And I had stopped waiting for life to hurt before I let it be beautiful. One evening, as the sun set behind the Atlanta skyline, we gathered in my living room. Vanessa rocked Grace to sleep while Marcus helped me hang a framed photograph, one taken at the ribbon cutting of our second housing project. When it was done, Marcus turned to me. Mom, I've been thinking. The next phase of the Carter project, we want to expand it, nationwide, with your blessing. I smiled. You don't need my blessing, Marcus. You just need your courage. He nodded, his eyes shining. I learned that from you. A week later, I sat alone in the garden, the same one where I'd once watched a boy hold up a sunflower taller than him. The season had changed again, the air, cool leaves rustling softly. I closed my eyes and listened the laughter of children nearby, the hum of life, the gentle rhythm of the world continuing. For a long time, my story had been about endurance. Then it became about reclaiming. Now it was simply about belonging to myself, to the people I'd forgiven, to the life that still unfolded with quiet generosity. I thought of Walter, of the lessons he left behind, of Marcus, who had learned to stand on his own, of Vanessa, who had turned apology into purpose, and of Grace, the tiny bridge between every version of us that had ever been broken. I smiled, tilting my face toward the fading light. Full circle. That's what Walter would have called it. Not the end, just the beginning again.